leaving their masked friends behind to face the full force of the law.
I think it's more or less a scientific fact at this point that Rockstar Games have little to no love for any of their games that came out before 2013, because there's just so many of their older titles that feel like they've been thrown to the wayside or completely forgotten about, tucked away in some dark, dusty corner. One of these is Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories, a prequel to Vice City and something of a spin-off to the main series. Released originally for the PSP in 2006, but then also ported to the PS2 a year later in 2007, along with Liberty City Stories that came out back in 2006. And as far as the GTA series go, it's definitely far from being one of the best.
Go to hell, bitch!
But I feel like Grand Theft Auto games are kinda like pizza, and by that I mean that even the weaker ones are still kinda decent, and guaranteed to fill up an empty stomach, definitive edition aside.
Alright, what do you need?
The story takes place in 1984, 2 years before Vice City, and you're playing as a guy named Vic Vance, the brother of Lance, and also a guy who was seen for all of 5 seconds in Vice City's intro before he got killed. Well, sorry, spoilers.
I think we have a deal, my friend.
The whole thing kicks off with Vic being stationed at Fort Baxter near the airport, where he starts doing jobs for his commanding officer, a guy named Martinez, a lot of which involves him getting drugs and picking up hookers, which understandably has him dishonorably discharged from the army pretty damn quickly.
Drugs, whores, you're out of here, soldier. You're a disgrace. You're a goddamn disgrace.
Then, as a free man, you're off doing jobs for some familiar characters, like Phil Cassidy, voiced again by the absolutely batshit insane Gary Busey,
Good to see you, brother. Come here.
along with a redneck gang leader called Marty.
I'm Marty J. Williams.
And this really forms the majority of the missions for the first couple of hours as you undertake various jobs for both of these guys, slowly getting on Marty's bad side after Vic gets too affectionate with his wife named Luis.
You and me both.
Eventually even having to kill Marty after he kidnaps her out of jealousy, which is some serious stalker behavior bullshit.
You're okay, Vic Vance.
But that's actually part of what instantly makes Vic such a likable protagonist, that sense of right or wrong that all of the best GTA leading men seem to have.
It's his own wife.
I mean, if you think about it, most of the guys you play as in these games are just utter sociopaths, leaving this trail of death and destruction everywhere they go, but it's the moments when they're more attentive to someone's feelings that makes them more endearing, and much more than just a hired gun.
Doesn't look like nothing. What's wrong?
That's the reason why Nico is the best protagonist out of all these games, and also the reason why Trevor is arguably one of the worst.
I killed people, smuggled people, sold people.
Find out who did that fucking robbery, all right? And if Michael Townley lives there, or anyone matching his description, I'm gonna kill you and your fucking cousin!
What an asshole.
And same thing with Vic, like he goes out of his way to help Louise escape this abusive relationship, simply because it's the right thing to do. Anyway, after Marty's taken out of the picture, the whole thing really opens up, and Vice City more or less becomes your cocaine-riddled oyster. Lance shows up at this point looking like Eddie Murphy out of Bowfinger, and the two of you take on the city piece by piece.
Yeah, hey, whatever you say.
Doing shifty drug deals and dodging less than scrupulous business partners along the way.
Really? Okay, prove it.
One of the best things about the entire game is seeing Vice City years before when Tommy Vercetti came onto the scene, even in just the subtle ways the city's been altered to show that difference in time. It's the kind of thing that most people wouldn't even really notice, but those who are familiar with the original are going to notice almost instantly. For instance, that construction site where you go to those missions from Avery is now an amusement park with an aptly named Ferris wheel. Then that almost iconic car park near Ocean Beach with the spiral ramp is now just an empty lot. The abandoned and disused mansion up on Prawn Island is actually inhabited at this point as well, being the base of operations for a couple of drug-running brothers you even do a bunch of missions for.
All right, I guess we're gonna work together.
In some instances, they've even made improvements to navigation, like there's now multiple new bridges to make it easier to get to the airport from the West Island, with even a whole new road added in across from Sunshine Autos, which is pretty damn handy considering there was more or less only one way in or out of the airport in the base game. It's still got all the other landmarks too, like the Malibu Club, the shopping malls, and you can still walk along the beach and see bikini bimbos sliding past on roller skates. So that essence of the city is still very much kept intact. Plus it brings back some familiar faces like Ricardo Diaz, Umberto Robina, who still has a bit of a fondness for seeing other men's balls.
Umberto, boss, I'm up for anything, man. I just don't want to have to take my balls out again.
And of course, Mr. Lance Vance Dance himself, and you'll do missions for all of these guys.
Let's pop.
So it really is like you're entering this slightly altered version of a familiar universe, and that's definitely part of its appeal.
You must be Vic. Jerry told me about you.
Visually, it's okay, I mean, for a PS2 game, but it is definitely rough around the edges these days, which is expected also considering it's a PSP game that's been ported across. It does look okay during the daytime, and I actually like some of the new effects they use for sunrise and sunset, but during nighttime and when it starts to rain, it does look pretty damn crappy.
Looks like shit.
It does look like shit.
Character models are definitely more detailed though, which is noticeable in cinematics, but the cinematics on the other hand are now a lot more simpler. Obviously because they didn't have the same kind of budget as the original game did.
Excuse me?
Car physics are still really impressive though, and they've got this sort of fake sort of reflection effect on vehicles now as well. Either way though, these older GTA games weren't ever really known for their graphical prowess, and it is definitely a case of it being gameplay over graphics, so the way it looks shouldn't really matter either way. It still feels like you're driving around 1980s Miami, or at least a city heavily inspired by it, so they understood the assignment and they've still managed to nail it, which at the end of the day is all that matters.
Yeah, let's roll.
The best thing by far though are the returning radio stations, which are still full of absolute bangers. The original Vice City and its many licensed tracks is the main thing that got me into 80s music all those years ago as a teenager. And there's a whole new lineup of really good songs in this game as well. From Hall & Oates, from Motley Crue through to Rick James, it's the kind of thing where no matter what station you end up getting when you hop into a car, you always feel like you need to leave that station on to hear the rest of the song play out. Having said that though, the station I listened to again the most was VCPR, because this time it has what I think is two of the funniest programs in the entire GTA series, with the Time Ranger and Moorhead rides again. The Time Ranger is like an old broadcast from 1944 about a guy who travels through time by jerking off, traveling to medieval England and France during the French Revolution, and this whole thing is fucking hilarious.
Good heavens, the ghost!
No, it's the Time Ranger.
What I just said.
He's got a special mini thingy that when he rubs, helps him right the world's wrongs. He showed me.
You did what with my son?
Don't get your knickers in a twist, sweetheart. I kept it on the up and up with the boy.
The characters in the broadcast keep commenting on how small this package is, and the whole Cary Grant impression the voice actors do just makes the whole thing even more entertaining.
Now, while it sounds confusing, it is in fact completely natural, and my own empirical research has definitely proved you don't go blind, which is lucky for me.
On the other hand, Moorhead Rides Again is another broadcast from the 1940s, but this time it's about a communist-hating, woman-slapping detective hunting down a suspected murderer with his portly assistant and Mexican buddy Pablo.
Hey, would you like a tortilla chip? Pablo, this is no time for eating. Vice Beach is under threat. A vicious murderer, pimp, and communist is on the loose in these beautiful wetlands right on our doorstep.
Both of these programs are so politically incorrect, and none of this would fly at all in this day and age. And that's kind of the reason why they're so funny to listen to, because they're just so far out of left field that you almost can't help but laugh.
I was searching for the souls of my ancestors.
But I thought you were Mexican. Why would they be buried in Florida?
Yeah, that's true. They're not here.
It reminds me too that people often forget just how insane some of the writing was in some of these old Rockstar games. And some of the dialogue like this in Vice City Stories is a real testament to that.
I want to bear back the little one.
The only thing is that new Mission Complete jingle, it can't hold a candle to the one from Vice City, but then again, that's to be expected. I mean, how could you ever possibly beat perfection?
Perfection.
As for the gameplay, well, it's kind of like a combination of Vice City, but also San Andreas. Taking mechanics from the latter, but just not all of them, which means it kind of sits somewhere in between. You still drive around the large open map, jacking cars from unsuspecting civilians, picking up missions from various characters, and either driving or shooting your way to success. The biggest improvement is being able to freely rotate the camera with the right thumbstick, along with the updated lock-on interface when shooting at enemies, which is a huge bonus to visibility. But then weirdly you can't crouch to improve your aim, or crouch walk around either, so it's kinda like a map. Vehicles on the other hand feel a lot more like San Andreas, being much heavier to control, with cars having way more oversteer, making it much easier to spin out if you're not watching your speed. It's a lot different to Vice City, where you could often take a corner at full tilt, pulling up the handbrake at the last second and still barely spinning out. You've got new vehicles added in as well, like police motorbikes, quad bikes, jet skis, and a hovercraft. The other thing is that it brings back the drive-by feature from San Andreas, where your buddies can hang out the windows and shoot at nearby enemies, which is a good thing when it works in your favor, but a really fucking bad thing when you're on the receiving end.
Come on, let's go.
And when you've got a car rock up that's got 3 dudes hanging out the window armed with MP5s, you're gonna see what I mean.
Break yourself, fool!
Probably the best inclusion though is being able to actually swim without drowning instantly like you're some kind of human medicine ball. Something which really should have been in the original Vice City to begin with.
Abandon ship!
They even show off this mechanic in the very first mission, but then the irony of it is that barely any of the main missions have you going anywhere near water anyway. It's not entirely foolproof either, because if your stamina bar runs out before you get back to land, you're still gonna drown. But as an alternative to literally drowning in shoulder-high pools of water, this is a godsend.
I'm drowning! Oh God, I'm drowning!
As for the weapons, they're mostly just reskins of the guns from Vice City. I mean, the MAC-10, for instance, is basically just a reskin Tech 9, and the MP5 is now an MP5K.
This shit is over.
Then the Colt Python is exactly the same gun, just with a completely pointless scope added on the top. The biggest stuff up here though I think is that there's not that many weapons you can aim in first person mode anymore. I mean, the AK and the M4 now use a lock-on system, which is a bit frustrating because it gives you less options when you want to be more accurate and shoot out people's tires, for instance. I mean, this is probably due to the PSP lacking that right thumbstick, but it does make the weapons almost kind of feel more dated than even the original Vice City. Otherwise though, shooting things overall is pretty much just more the same. It's pretty easy to lock onto a single enemy and then just switch across targets to take them all that quickly, you know, assuming the auto aim doesn't shit itself and lock onto the wrong person.
Hey, you! Know the asshole!
Melee combat is still hilariously bad though, and the AI can essentially stun lock you with melee attacks, which is incredibly annoying.
What the fuck, Vic?
It's all just like a bit of a reminder of how crappy the combat was in these games before GTA 4 came along. And I mean, look, it's fine as a means to an end, but it is kind of hilarious to think that we actually put up with this kind of stuff all those years ago. I will say though that I do appreciate the fact that if you're wasted or busted during a mission, that you can easily buy back your weapons at the police station or the hospital for a couple of $1,000. And while that might seem a little bit expensive at first, that becomes a bit of a drop in the ocean later on when you're absolutely flush with money.
Break yourself, fool!
The GTA games are always the most fun to me when you're creating havoc on purpose, like shooting at the cops and seeing how long you can last until the authorities can put you down. So being able to do this and not be punished by losing all my weapons when I'm finally killed is a huge bonus. Now, being a shorter game than Vice City and intended for play on a handheld console, which realistically most people are going to be playing when either traveling or taking a shit.
I'm in the toilet taking a shit.
Vice City Stories doesn't waste much time in throwing you into some pretty intense missions.
Come on, let's go.
And having said that, I do think Vice City Stories really has some of the absolute worst missions in the entire series. Or at least for the games that came out during that gaming generation anyway.
You have every right. Fuck!
I feel like every GTA game has at least one really awful mission, one that just has you wanting to throw that controller out the window and snap the disc in half. In Vice City, for instance, for me, it was undoubtedly that one where you had to race that fat asshole around town so he'd be the getaway driver for your heist. In San Andreas, it's got to be that infamous train robbery, which is the source of much untold teenage trauma. And yeah, while all that's fine, you expect a few tough ones here and there, Vice City Stories has like a dozen or so of these kind of missions. The main problem is that a lot of these have time constraints and the margin of error is really low, to the point that even making a couple of errors is going to pretty much ensure you're going to have to restart from scratch. Often they'll end with you having a really high wanted level and you have to escape from the cops who all use their cars as a goddamn battering ram. On a positive side though, this is that period of the GTA games where you could drive into a pay and spray right in front of the police and they act like you turned into vapor. But consider too that this is still from that era where these games lacked mid-mission checkpoints, or even checkpoints in general. So whenever you fail a mission, you've got to go through the whole rigmarole again of going all the way back to the start and initiating it all over again. More than that though, some of these missions, they just aren't fun in concept or design. And I really have to think that someone at Rockstar was just having a really bad day, and wanted to share their misery with the player because that's the only logical explanation for causing so much suffering. One of the earliest missions in the game, for instance, has you rescuing crates of moonshine from a warehouse before the whole thing burns down.
No, God!
And this involves driving a forklift around through these narrow gaps in between containers and then dropping them into the back of a truck. Each time you collect a crate, another piece of the warehouse collapses, making your route back more and more complex. And you're almost like destined to fail this a couple of times until you learn the best possible path to take. Not to mention, it's the first and only time you're required to drive a forklift. And also to bring back that San Andreas comparison, very similar to an equally cancerous mission in that game as well.
No, God, please, no! No!
A later mission has you trying to put out a fire at a whorehouse, a mission aptly named Hose the Hose, Lamau. And the time limit for this one is so strict that the only way to beat it is to have a fire truck before the mission even begins. Because that time spent getting one during the mission, it just doesn't allow enough time left over for you to put out the fire.
Ah! It burns! Ah! Ah! Ah!
An even later mission has you taking out hitmen backstage at a Phil Collins concert, because, yeah, Phil Collins is in this game.
Aren't you? Phil, mate. Phil Collins.
Running around behind the scenes and then eventually heading to the basement to disarm a bomb. And despite me sprinting around the entire time, I barely managed to beat this with literally 2 seconds left. Yeah. Fuck. Without a doubt though, the worst one is one where you've got to use a chopper to steal a bunch of shipping containers. And this right here is the kind of thing that just makes you want to stop playing the game entirely. Right, so first off, you've got to drive all the way from the North Island down to the west of the map to get the chopper. Then you fly off to the airport to pick up the first container and take it back to the drop point. After that, you've got to get a second container, which is being moved on a truck before it reaches Little Havana. And this is a little bit trickier, trying to match your speed now to a moving vehicle and latch on at the same time, whilst also avoiding trees and other obstacles.
I can't believe you did it!
Still though, it's not too bad, ending with you again having to take it all the way back to the drop point. And you'd think that that would be it, except there's one last component, right? Because now you've got to rush all the way back to the beach on the East Island to rescue your contact, who's now being chased by bikers.
Please, senor!
And not only that, but there's a time limit as well, because his car can only take so much damage before exploding. So, not only do you need to make it all the way across to the other side of the map in record time, but also latch onto the top of his car with the magnet before it's destroyed. All whilst he's in the middle of a high-speed chase, which means this asshole can't drive in a straight line for more than 2 seconds, and is often going to randomly swerve or turn down side streets to make it even trickier. Every time you fail this part of the mission, and let's be honest, you're going to fail it, you have to do those preceding parts all over again. And it's the kind of thing where it just stops being fun at that point, like it just becomes menial and an outright chore. Not to mention, this is on the PS2 as well, like I can't even imagine trying to do this on a PSP. You ever notice too how a lot of the really crappy missions in the Grand Theft Auto series always involve flying vehicles? Like Demolition Man in Vice City, the one in San Andreas with all the toy planes, or that other one in GTA 4, where you have to hold a chopper steady so Jacob can hit someone with an RPG. The only way I was finally able to beat this one was by giving myself a high wanted level on purpose, which meant that all those pursuing police vehicles back on the ground kept putting up roadblocks. So the guy I was trying to save had more collisions, making it easier to catch up and latch onto his car.
Thank you, senor! You're incredible!
But if you need to borderline exploit the game just to complete a basic mission, then something's gone a little wrong in the development process.
Gracias, senor! That was fantastic! Adios!
Another really awful one sees Vic completely cooked off his chops after a van full of cocaine blows up in his face and he takes the brunt of it. And for this one, for the entire mission, you're basically playing it in slow motion. Having to drive across town, find the attackers, kill them, get the coke, and then drive back all within the time limit, while your vision and even the van swerves left and right constantly. Oh yeah, and despite the game practically playing at half speed, the clock still moves in real time. So yeah, riddle me that one, bitch. Just comes back to what I said before, it's just not enjoyable. It's not a fun or a clever mission, it's a weird handicap that just makes the whole thing kind of tedious to sit through. And the worst thing too is that the rewards for all of these are more or less just pocket change. There's one you gotta do for Lance where you're rushing around town blowing up police antennas with an RPG, which ends with you getting a 5-star wanted level and having to outrun a bunch of cops, and your reward for this is a measly $300.
Is that it?
Just kind of like someone missed out on a zero when they were tallying up the mission rewards. The flip side to all of this is the rest of the missions, which are actually fun and really juxtaposed with the crushing difficulty of all the others. There's like a whole series of missions here again for a movie studio, playing stuntmen for all these movie scenes and commercials, and they're an absolute blast to play through. There's another one where you're helping out as an extra in a zombie movie, aptly named Brawn of the Dead, shooting at slowly shambling zombies and hacking them down with a katana. And you'd almost have to be a blind monkey with leprosy to not be able to beat these first try. And it's like such a nice, relaxing vacation after the metaphorical waterboarding you get from some of those other tougher missions. As a result, most of your time is spent and your cash is earned in the empire building mechanic, which really is the best part of the whole game. This again is kind of like a combination of the money-making assets you had in Vice City and then taking over gangs in San Andreas. Right, so early on after you take care of Marty and send him off to inbred hell, you can start taking over various businesses across Vice City and claiming them as your own, with there being about 30 in total across the entire city. It's a pretty simple process. You pull up to any one of these fine establishments, destroy the gang car parked outside, and then murder everyone who comes out of the building. Once you've cleared everyone out, you can then convert the site into any business of your choosing, either loan sharking, protection racket, prostitution, drugs, smuggling, or robbery, with each business generating more or less cash.
You did it, Vic. The whole damn caboodle's yours.
Even just going around taking over all of these sites is addictive enough, but then when you start to look into how to maximize the cash you get from each of these is where you really truly want to spend all of your time. For starters, each site can be either a small, medium, or a high-rolling venture, which alone kicks up more cash every day. But then to make it even more complex, each category has its own unique missions that maxes out your reputation and earnings. So for the protection racket, the missions involve going from business to business, shaking down the owners or protecting them from rival gangs.
Hey, I paid for protection, so protect me!
You do this 15 times and you go from being a nobody to the ultimate badass. Literally. The prostitution one is like Crazy Taxi, just with more hookers. Yeah. Driving around town to drop these lovely ladies of the night off at prospective clients. And then even having to deal with the tight asses who won't pay up and try to slip away. The repo missions have you seizing back trucks or motorbikes from people who aren't paying their bills, and most of these are absolute gimmies. In fact, half the time the vehicle you need to return spawns right outside the mission area itself. Where it starts to get a bit harder though is for the last three rackets: robbery, smuggling, and drugs, and some of these can be pretty challenging. Mostly because half of these again end up in you being pursued by the cops or rival gangs. And like I said before, man, like a bunch of guys hanging out the windows with submachine guns can spell trouble pretty damn quickly. It's also doubly annoying because the only other offensive tactic the AI has in this game is just to ram the ever-loving shit out of you. Like that is their only method of attack. And it goes for both the police and the enemy gangs. Like they just smash into your car from whatever angle they can and try to run you off the road. There's no sense of self-preservation or anything either. I mean, these guys are like Mad Max-style kamikaze warriors, just trying to end your whole existence. The other thing is that when you start taking over rackets, you initiate a war with that specific gang, which means they'll start attacking you on sight, but also going after your own businesses as payback. And it gets to the point where you're spending so much time retaliating against these attacks and protecting your existing businesses that it becomes a full-time job.
Go to hell.
And it always seems too that these guys attack a business that's on the other side of the goddamn map, forcing you to spend 5 minutes getting there in the first place. What the game never explains to you as well is that resetting the console, like, you know, literally resetting it, makes the gang stop attacking you entirely, pretty much exploiting that whole mechanic and making the process much easier. And I only found out about this when I was replaying through this for this video, after I got the shits and went online to see if anyone else had bitched about the same thing as me. And I sure wish that 20-year-old me knew this back in 2007, because it would have saved me a lot of heartache, as would rethinking my choice in girlfriends at the time. Still though, this feature I think is the most addictive element of the entire game, and I honestly would have been fine messing around with this stuff alone. Gets to the point where you start making over like 100 grand from setting all of these up alone, even with unlocking all these new outfits as well. And it kind of makes those main missions seem a little bit pointless in comparison, especially in terms of making money. I mean, if you're scoring a few $100 in total versus this ever-replenishing cash supply that can net you up to 5 or 6 figures.
We're in the money, we're in the money.
When all is said and done though, it does beg the question, what now? I mean, I went from having a few thousand in the bank to a couple of million, but then having nothing to spend it on. So what do you do? Well, like all Grand Theft Auto games, you go off and get the few dozen side collectibles and finish all the odd jobs. Like shooting these 99 red balloons scattered around the city. Still a damn sight better than shooting those 200 pigeons in GTA 4, something which I still get PTSD just thinking about. But that's part of what makes these older GTA games so good, the sense in that there's always something you can be doing, even if just to pass the time. Just like with Vice City, I'd often leave my console on one of the radio stations and let it play off in the background while I went off and did other stuff in my room, and that's the kind of vibe that these games still have.
Hijo de puta!
I've even still got my original PS2 save file for Grand Theft Auto 3, and I'd often get the hankering just to load it back up and go on a mini rampage with all of those unlocked weapons to see how long I could last. And Vice City Stories might not be the best game in this series, but it's still one of the games that captures that same feeling.
Screw you bitches!
Obviously, for the sake of preserving history, it'd be nice if Rockstar remastered this across to newer platforms, but then again, it's also a bit of a window into how different the series really used to be. People have been so spoiled with GTA 5 and how accessible that really is, because the series has really moved on from being these kind of antiquated open world experiences, into these highly cinematic scripted missions which are kind of impossible to fail. I mean, I've played through the entirety of GTA 5's campaign, I think maybe 3 times, and I reckon I could count on one hand the amount of times I ever failed a mission. But then I'd run out of fingers and toes just counting the amount of times I failed single missions in Vice City Stories alone.
Hey, we gotta stop meeting like this. Eat lead?
It is still an interesting relic though from a time when Rockstar were effortlessly edgy, but also effortlessly honed at their craft, and really just the masters of getting the absolute most out of the technology that they were working with.
They can't arrest you for that. No, but they can shoot me.
Either way, this takes a great game like Vice City and recaptures what made the whole thing so memorable, adding in a whole new bunch of things to mess around with on top of it.
Sure.
And the fact it was originally designed for a handheld console makes the whole thing even more impressive. Vic fans might not have the quiet, admirable confidence of Claude, the Giga Chad attitude of Tommy Vercetti, or the lovable, sociopathic trait that Niko Bellic was blessed with, but he still left his mark in a series that's become a household name.
Why don't you come down here and ask me that again, huh?
And at the end of the day, he's still a better protagonist than Trevor.
Let's, you prick!